Hello, everyone, and welcome to Teach Me Teacher, a podcast for educators, where we, the teachers, become students ourselves. Now, to kind of set up things for this episode, to tell you where the idea of this came from. The other day, I came across a Huffington Post article reporting that teacher shortages are a big problem in today's world. The article references a survey showing that since 2008, teacher satisfaction has dropped from 62% to 39%. This is the lowest level it's been in 25 years. Of course, the article attributes a variety of reasons for the low percentage, such as under-resourced schools, the loss of job protections, and increase in the amount of mandated standardized testing, etc. Now, there's a lot to think about after reading these numbers, but I'll tell you what I thought about. The thing I instantly kind of started wondering about was how many teachers are scared away from the profession because of articles like these. We've all been on social media. We all see those posts, talking about the bad things of teaching, how teachers are underpaid, how there's no respect in the classroom, yada, yada, yada. We know, we've seen these posts. And what I think about is how many great teachers, how many people that have something to offer to the field of education are we driving away by not being active? And when I say we, I mean teachers in general. A lot of us, we're very quiet about our profession. We love what we do. We really enjoy it, but we're quiet. We don't speak enough about how awesome it is to do what we do. And I want other like-minded people to be informed from real teachers in real schools. So today, in the spirit of all this, I have with me Miss Ingram, a great teacher from Richland Middle School, who's just finishing up her first year, as we might have it. Hi, Miss Ingram.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. I am just finishing up my first year. So I'm feeling really good right now.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You feeling the stress just ease right off?
Well, as you know, I'm getting married in 2 weeks, so no. The stress is not easing off. But as far as school, yes.
Yeah, it's a little different stress.
Yeah.
But the stress of having, the daily, is changing just to...
The daily grind is getting a little easier.
The daily grind's going down, and the moment of my life's about to change is rising.
Yes, yeah. In a great way. This makes it sound like I'm not excited to get married.
Disclaimer.
Disclaimer, I love my fiance. No, but yeah, so the life is changing, but school is winding down, and I'm a little sad, but ready for the break.
Yeah. Now, I am curious. I thought about this all day when I was ending my first year last year. This is only my second year to teach, for those of you who don't know me. But this year, I didn't feel as... I wasn't missing them as much when they were walking out the door because I know I'm going to see most of them next year in the hall. I know you taught 7th and 6th. Did you feel nostalgia a little bit, or how did that roll?
Yeah, so this past weekend, so we had 2 more days of school left. I was sitting at home and my fiance was asking me what was wrong because I was really down. Yeah. And I was kind of bummed because I was like, gosh, I'm going to miss these kids. And I love these kids, but I was definitely ready for a break from them. I didn't know if I would feel like I would miss them. And it all just kind of hit me that, even though I am going to see them all next year, or the majority of them next year, I don't know. I got to see them every single day, and now they're gone. And so it's a weird dynamic. I'm ready for the break, but it's going to be weird to not see them for 2 or 3 months. Yeah,
it was, last year, I taught 8th grade last year, so all my students were, they were leaving, going off to high school, say goodbye to them. They'd grown into, young teenagers, and they had, real people, and you get to know them and know their backstory and stuff. And then over the summer, I was like, aw, I was like, there's a bit of like sadness there. I was like, I'm not going to see these guys again. And then the weird part was when I was starting 6th grade, I had all these new kids, a lot younger than the 8th graders. And I was like, where are all my students from last year? Like, there was this weird nostalgia that came in a strange way. So it'll be interesting to talk to you in a year and see if those same feelings came up or whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway, so enough about nostalgia and sadness for the end of the year. The reason that I have you here today, Ingram, like I said, is really to kind of talk about how just the teaching profession, because you're fresh into it. I'm fairly fresh into it. There's a lot of fresh teachers at Richland Middle School in general. and we go through a lot of different issues and a lot of highs and a lot of lows, and I don't think we talk about that enough. And what the news ends up talking about, like you saw in the Huffington Post article, was, they talk about how, teachers are underpaid and they're all stressed and their lives are just misery and everyone's crying all the time in teacher land, right? But it's just not true.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of good and there is some bad, but I think the good, and I think any teacher that stays here is going to say the good outweighs the bad in many ways. So really, to get to the point, I want to ask you, so what, at the beginning, when you were thinking about it, what really drove you to become a teacher? Why did you want to do this? Did you see these articles at all and they scared you, or how did that go?
So I was like, my whole life I've wanted to be a teacher, like since the longest I can remember. But I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher, actually. So until I got to college, knew I was going to be a kindergarten teacher. I just loved being around kids, and I think whenever I was growing up, it was just the idea of being, I don't know, I babysat and nannied, and I was just like, I love kids, blah, blah, blah. Like, was very naive about what teaching actually was.
Sure.
And I got to college, I went to A&M, and they place us in classrooms in the College Station area to get us some experience. So I was placed in a kindergarten classroom and was like, get me the heck out of here. I can't do it. And
right.
So, anyways, all that being said, I was then placed in a middle school classroom my sophomore year of college. I absolutely loved it. I loved the kids. I loved that the content and the curriculum that I got to teach them. I loved that they were, in my opinion, they had kind of their own ideas. They were a little more individual, and I got to challenge them and their thinking, and they got to have, I don't know, just conversations with me that you can't really have with a 5-year-old.
Sure.
And so that's when I realized I loved middle school and wanted to teach middle school. As far as being discouraged by just the media or what people would tell me about education, I remember when I went to college, my 4th grade teacher, her name was Miss Lyde, and I loved Miss Lyde, but she found out that I was going to college to major in education, and she told me to not do it.
Really?
Yeah, she did. She said it's changed so much since I was in it, like between the testing that you have to do and your evaluations, like it's not what it used to be. I love you, so I'm telling you, like, do not do it. That was really hard for me because she was my favorite teacher, and one of the reasons why I wanted to be a teacher, then she was the one telling me that it wasn't worth it. But I think what happens is, like, education has changed a lot, and there are some not so great parts about it, but there are some really great parts about it too. And I feel like people just like to focus on, I don't know, the things that have changed that they don't necessarily like. So I'm also fairly optimistic. So whenever people gave me the warnings, I was like, I'll be fine.
You just saw the rainbows. You're
like,
no, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's good. I mean, a lot of the ways people fall into professions is they're just, they got the blinders on. They're like, this is what I want to do. And then for better or for worse, they make it, through all the naysayers and whatnot. But I'm curious. So I had a really similar experience, when I was thinking about going, to be a teacher and stuff. I had, one of my great mentors, Mrs. Hammer, I'm still good friends with her, shout out. But she kind of the opposite situation. Every time I talked about teaching, she was really encouraging. She never lied about like the rainbows that, teaching kids or anything like that. But she was very like, you should do this if you want to. I believe that you can do it all, etc. So like, how did you take that response? Like when she said you shouldn't do it, like did you like consider it at all, or what happened in your brain?
So so she told me initially freshman year of college, and at that point I was just kind of like, well, this is what I'm doing. But then later, my junior year of college, we met up and we were talking, and she was asking how it was going. And at my junior year of college, I was actually thinking I wasn't going to teach because I was doing a junior methods internship is what they called it. So I was in the classroom one day a week and was teaching lessons, and I just saw the pressure that my teacher in particular, my mentor teacher in the classroom was feeling. She, I know she didn't find a lot of joy in what she did. And so I thought she was a great teacher, but she definitely didn't love what she did. And so I was seeing this very anxious and negative teacher, and was starting to kind of doubt myself and question, and was just like, oh my gosh, Miss Lyde told me I shouldn't do this, and now I'm in the classroom and it seems like everybody hates it. And so we sat down and talked. We'd gotten lunch and we were sitting down and talking, and I was telling her my concerns, and she just told me, she was like, well, why do you want to teach? Like, what are any positives that might keep you in the profession? And I just told her that I love kids, but I also think I have a really realistic expectation that I'm not going to like all of them. And that this profession isn't about, I don't know, having this life-changing moment every single day. Like, you get into it and maybe once a month you have some moment that you're like, oh yeah, this kid just told me how much I changed his life and whatever. But that's not the daily routine of a teacher. And that's not bad that you don't have those life-changing moments every single day in the classroom. Anyway, all that being said, when I told Mrs. Lyde that, I love kids, but I think I'm also realistic about what this looks like, that's when she said, I think you should go for it then, because so often teachers do come in with this rainbows and butterflies, and those are the teachers that have a harder time staying in it because they're not aware of what they're actually getting themselves into.
Yeah, their whole world is Freedom Rider Diaries
exactly.
and Dead Poet Society, right?
Yeah.
They think, it's going to be this big moment. You're going to have tribulation at the beginning, and then everyone's going to come together and
within an hour and a half.
Yeah, and it's just all going to be better, right? And I think, and that's a really good point when it comes to setting those expectations, and why I really wanted to have this conversation, because when the teachers that come in and stay are the ones that a lot of times are the ones that come in with healthy expectations. They're like, you know what? Yeah, there's going to be great moments. There's going to be kids that really get what's happening. I'm going to learn a lot from them, which is just as powerful as them learning from you.
Yeah.
But there's going to be those times where it's just, it's not sunshine and rainbows, it's real life. Moving on to the next thing, you had this doubt, but you eventually decided, this is what I'm going to do. And I really wanted to hit on this because you have an interesting point of view when it comes to the hiring process of coming to RMS.
So before actually getting the call that I had an interview at RMS, honestly, that was probably, if we're talking about stress, that was the most stressful part, was just waiting to get interviews from people. Sure. I knew I wanted to be up here in this area. It's where my fiance lived. We were long distance. And so I applied to, 15 or so districts up here in the area. And that's, I know, just as encouragement to other teachers, it's okay that you're going to have to wait to get an interview. Yeah. You do those district online applications and then you don't really know where it went. Yeah, you just have to kind of sit and wait, and sometimes you have to email principals and call people and make stuff happen for you. But that was probably the most stressful part for me. I remember getting the phone call and I was just this sigh of relief, oh, I got my first interview. Yeah. Thank God, Now,
was that call the one for RMS?
That call was the one for RMS. So RMS was my first interview. I'd gone to A&M, makes you do a career fair before you graduate, a big one that they have. So I fielded, some questions from people at the career fair that are similar to ones you would have in an interview, but I hadn't had a formal interview before my one at RMS. Which, moving along, is a different interview process than your typical interview. But yeah, it was great. They actually called it a hiring event. So I was already a little intrigued,
So they changed the name.
Yeah. What is this hiring event going to be? I didn't even know if I was going in for an interview until they emailed me some stuff later. But yeah, so it was a long day. I got to the school at 8. I probably left around 1.
Wow.
There were a couple things. That it was me and 2 other girls who both got all three of us got hired on at RMS, but we had to read an article and be ready to have a discussion about it. And to be perfectly honest with you, I don't remember what that article was about, but it was something having to do, it was classroom management.
Okay.
Yeah. So read the article about classroom management and be ready to have like a roundtable discussion. When we showed up, we were given, it was almost like different scenarios of things that you might experience in your classroom or kids that have different disabilities, and then we had to write down like what modifications we would give them. So I guess that was the first thing we did. We showed up, we read through these scenarios, had to write down like what modifications we would give these kids. While we were doing that, we also had another paper with like 12 different character traits or words, I guess, on them, and we had to pick one and be ready to talk about it. So we had those two pieces of paper that we were working with. Then, with the three of us who were interviewing, we all had to prepare a lesson, and then we actually had
that day with what was going on.
Yeah, so we'd gotten the information about the lesson we had to prepare. Like, I got like 4 or 5 days before the interview, so I prepared it before.
True.
And so while we were, so that day we're sitting in the library, we're filling out about the modifications and picking our word, and then we were getting pulled to go teach for the lady who's now our department head, Keisha Dennis. And so that was incredibly intimidating, but really fun because it was nice to get to just meet some of the kids and feel what it was like to be in the classroom with the kids who go to RMS. But yeah, so taught this lesson, and then after the three of us had all taught our lessons, we had to have our roundtable discussion of that article I was talking about before. And so the principal and the instructional coach were in the room, and it was just the 3 applicants. And we all just kind of took turns sharing our ideas about classroom management.
You know what's all I'm thinking about when I hear this, and I've heard this story before, but anytime I think about this, I go, this is what I would love to be in that group.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's what I love it. I love having conversations and getting into it. But at the same time, I could understand how that could be like a horror, like a nightmare for some people that are just like, especially if you're not prepared.
Yeah.
You know, that's like, I could just imagine, the wheels that would turn in some people's heads.
Well, I remember I don't remember who told it to us, but I remember somebody said, I'm surprised all 3 of you showed up. A lot of the time, our interview process is so extensive that people get scared and don't show up, So I could see, I was intimidated by it, but I thought it was interesting. Like, I was excited to get to teach in front of the kids, and, it was a long day. After the discussion, we ended in like a formal interview where we sat down with the principal, and that was the more like traditional interview that I think most people think of. But yeah, I feel like I've talked too much about this, but it was a long, a long process.
And I think it's good for anyone to hear just kind of how different it can be, because I can guarantee teachers that are listening to this that have been teachers are like, well, that's not what I went through.
Yeah.
Right. And just having that knowledge is kind of interesting. But when you think about, like, if I was a principal, what would be the one thing you'd want to see, right? You'd want to see the teacher you're looking at teach.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do. Anyone can interview well, right? Anyone can talk the talk, but walking the walk is 100% different. Yeah. So that situation, to anyone who isn't a teacher, come with your A game, because they might throw you into the pit and say, have fun, right?
Fun. Yeah.
So, it's a nice warning. But so you get your interview, you go through this long day, you're exhausted, you're like, man, I hope this was worth it. I hope everything's good, right? Yeah. Did they send you an email or a call?
So the principal at the time called me a day or 2 days later. I think it was 2 days later. I was at home. I'm from Austin, so I was at my house in Austin with my mom, and I see this 817 number pop up on my phone, and stomach just kind of like drops, you know. But yeah, so she was calling to tell me that they were really excited to have me on board if I wanted to accept the position. And oh my gosh, I was so excited and relieved, because you're right. After going through this whole process, it would be like, man, I don't want this to go to waste. Which it wouldn't have if I hadn't gotten the job. I gained a ton of experience, but it was just a good feeling to know that I went through this pretty strenuous application process, and
I imagine that kind of gave some confidence for it too, because you're like, you know what, I went through this and I made it. You know, they liked me. So even if you had doubts, you're like, you know what, I made it through this.
Yeah, I can make it through anything.
So I'm gonna be great.
Yeah.
So now I remember this very vividly, getting up to this point when the day's about to start, you know, you're about to have your first class.
Yeah.
Right? Or even, you know, the first day of going into the school, you meet all the new teachers and you're, you know, doing all the name learning and all that good stuff. What were there fears that started coming up that weren't there before, or were you just giddy?
Yeah, so the nerves and the fear didn't really hit me until August, because I got the job offer pretty early. It was, I think, very end of April or beginning of May. Mm-hmm. And so I had a lot of things going on personally. I was graduating college. I was moving up to Fort Worth, never lived in the area before. So it was all just a lot of exciting life change. And then August hits, and you start going to the new hire orientations and, you know, all the meetings, and then like meeting all the staff. And it was just like, oh, this is actually happening. Like, I'm going to have kids. And, you know, it was very exciting. But I mean, any person who's ever taught, like the first year, it really is surreal. I don't know, like I remember I was like, oh gosh, I'm the adult in the room. Like I'm the person who's in charge here. It's my name on the door. And I think the majority of my emotions were excitement, but I think you're crazy if you don't have a little bit of anxiety, just because there's a lot of unknown that you're entering into.
Yeah. And you know, I'm just nodding my head along with everything you're saying, because I remember I was standing in my first day. I think it took about maybe till like third period or fourth period, you know, about halfway during the day, and I was like, oh, like, I'm in this now, right? And it's these kids are here, and I'm in charge of, you know, their learning and facilitating their growth, and, you know, every other, you know, buzzword you can possibly put with teaching. You're like, this is now, like, this is going down. And it really is, like you said, it's mostly excitement, because you're like, this is cool, this is new, and then it's like, all right, now it's time to do it.
Yeah, it's a big responsibility, which isn't something to get yourself freaked out about. Sure. But like I said, I think you'd be a little crazy if, like, at some point the responsibility of your job didn't set in a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, and that's okay. So this segues right into the next thing. So you're a new teacher. You have a million things you're thinking about, let alone personal life stuff that you're dealing with, along with it, you know, whatever's going on in your life. You have lesson plans and grades and tests and acronyms that everyone at schools use, because everyone loves acronyms, and you don't know what any of them mean for a long time. So how did you handle the lesson plan and just kind of coping with all of this new things that are going on?
Yeah. Okay. So lesson planning in particular, I do not pride myself on being very creative when it comes to lesson plans. That is an area of growth for me. Mm-hmm. And so that was the thing that was definitely the most stressful, because, you know, you want to be the teacher that has these amazing, engaging, you know, like lesson plans that your kids have all these light bulb moments. Like, you want all those things. And I just didn't even know where to start. Like, I had a great education at A&M, but I was not prepared for this. So
how do you take this standard
and
create something that everyone's engaged in and they learn and you know they're learning?
Well, and my thing was, and this is probably embarrassing to admit, but like, it seemed like all of my coworkers had they were very knowledgeable about what standards we were even teaching, and I was just like, I don't even know what, like, I'm teaching reading, I don't know like what specifically, because I was brand new. So for people listening, you and I were teaching partners this year.
Yes.
So I'm going to brag on you a little bit and my other teaching partner, because I mean, y'all know that you carried me definitely through the entire first semester, if not the second, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that, honestly.
Sure.
Like, that's why I would tell a lot of first year teachers is, I mean, people want to help you.
Yeah.
People, especially people who have the experience. At least at the RMS campus, I've never met an adult on campus who would not go above and beyond to help you. Sometimes you just have to know that you need to ask for it.
Yeah,
So,
and just to second your point, like when a first year teacher last year, Mrs. Bowles, she was my social studies partner, and she did the leg lifting. So when I had, was kind of the older person on the team for us, all I did was I just kind of, okay, Bowles did this for me, so I'm going to go do it was almost like paying it forward. And I think at this campus, at least the teachers that are here and have been here for a while, and the ones that, really mesh with their team, I think there's that mentality of, we're all in this together. I'm going to reach out and hopefully I can take some stress off of their shoulders, because, who knows what's happening inside that brain, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too. Like, like I said, I don't know, my lesson plans would have been non-existent, definitely the first 6 weeks for sure, because the first 6 weeks, not only is it lesson planning, but it's, who do I call when I have a kid's desk that's broken in my room, and like this kid just like flipped another kid off? What do I do with that? Like whatever, right. Like, because that just happens at school, especially in middle school. And so I really relied on you guys definitely the first 6 weeks, and then you do get more comfortable with it. It's you practice, and I love teaching, and so I wasn't okay with not being a great lesson planner. Mm-hmm. I looked up, there's a ton of stuff online. I would look up stuff on Teachers Pay Teachers and Pinterest and different blogs, and I wasn't obsessive about it, but I enjoyed doing it because I wanted to get better at it. And so definitely the first 6 weeks, lesson planning was not a strength of mine, but I hope at least that I grew in that as the year went on, just as I got more comfortable with what a lesson plan should even look like.
Yeah, and what it looks like when you teach, because that's I think that's a big thing too. That I definitely didn't think about this before I was a teacher, but it's even if say your partner's great and they're going to help you out with lesson plans, awesome, you got that. But it's going to look different in your class. It's going to look different for each student, but it's going to look different for how you teach, because everyone you find a groove, right, and you find your voice as an educator and kind of what you take part in the classroom and your personality. And that I can guarantee you that even though Bowles and I would have, the same lesson, 100% different if you walked into the rooms, just because of the way we did things. So, and that takes time to get used to. Yeah. And that feeds your lesson plans, or at least it did mine. I imagine it did yours.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because I probably didn't feel very comfortable with like management and what type of teacher I was probably until the second semester. And so that definitely does change the way that you teach things, because that's something that people will say in education to you all the time, at least my first year, is figure out what works for you as a teacher. And that is really important, because it could be a great lesson, but if that's not what you're comfortable with or the way you teach or your style, then it's not going to go well.
Yeah, right. And on paper, things can look beautiful, and you're like, this is the best lesson ever. And sometimes it will be, and you're like, wow, that really worked. But, I've had lessons, and every teacher I've ever met has had a lesson that they thought was the boss lesson, the lesson that could destroy all other lessons, and it failed.
Yeah.
It flat out just dropped, like a rock out of the sky or something. And you're like, oh, I need to reevaluate what this means. So that takes time to kind of get used to. But did you have this moment, like, because you have all these creative ideas, you want to do all these things. Did you have a time where you're like, I really want to do everything, and then at one point you realized you're not going to do a lot of the stuff that you had planned?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's a huge thing with teaching, is figuring out what works for you and what doesn't, and also being okay with, I think this whole list of 10 things could work for me, but there's not that many hours in the day, And that's what Mr. Whitfield, our principal, is really great about. At least every time I've talked with him, he says, you need do one thing really well, and do that one thing really well. And so, I mean, for me, like, we'd start off the beginning of the year thinking about doing these really cool interactive notebooks. Like, we found all this stuff and we thought it was going to be really cool. And then by the end of the first 6 weeks, they were essentially spirals that the kids and I think it would have been great had it worked. I think it could have really enhanced my classroom, but the reality is it just didn't happen. Sure. And that's okay. Like, the kids didn't suffer because, we didn't have the perfect table of contents with the, perfect notes and whatever. So that was one of my first, because I was so excited about these notebooks, like, so excited about them. And so that was one of my first things. I was like, I'm okay with letting this go, because this year it's just not going to happen. Now, next year, I would love to figure out, like, a better way to do the interactive reading notebooks. But that's just one example that comes to mind of something I was really excited about. And then very quickly it was just like, it's just not going to happen.
Journals seem to be the thing. People are always like, these journals are going to be sweet and they're going to be awesome. And I'm even talking about that for next year for my class. But you always have these ideas of these journals, and then sometimes things just fall apart, or it doesn't work for some reason. Yeah. Or you find other things that you like and you're like, I don't really like that anymore. Now, you mentioned briefly, who to call, when that kid, flips off the other person, or when someone's angry or whatever. So classroom management is like teacher 101. It's the one thing everyone talks about. There's a million professional developments out there on classroom management, but everyone does it differently, and everyone kind of figures out what works differently. Yeah. Right? I mean, I guess that's kind of the name of the game in teaching, is find out what works for you, right? You said it yourself. Yeah. But when it comes to classroom management, I know, me personally, my personality, I'm very jovial and, laid back. So taking on that role as the authoritative figure in a room, and like, I control, what's happening here, and, certain things need to happen in this space and certain things can't. Like, it took me a while to get used to it, and I'm still, it's a work in progress for me. But how did you come to the realization of what classroom management was, and how did you kind of step into your own shoes and fill that role that a teacher has to?
Yeah. So for me, I know this is a podcast, so you can't see what I look like, but I'm 23, and I probably look like I'm in high school. So that was teaching middle school, and you hate to think that kids would make judgments or whatever, but that was a big thing right off the bat. Is these kids are like, who is this young girl trying to teach us?
Who is person looks like my sister.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I mean, I think that's a struggle that's great to be honest about with any young teacher, is like, a lot of the time, especially the older you get, or the older grades you teach, that's a dynamic that I think you have to be aware of the fact that, if you're a younger teacher and you're teaching middle school on up, not that they don't respect you as much, I hate to say that, but it's just hard because you are closer to them in age, and they're aware of that. Yeah. So that was something that I was nervous about before I even got into the classroom, is being so young. But as far as classroom management, I'm smiling right now because I don't know where to start.
It's a big thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, I learned very quickly that some teachers can be yellers. That's not my thing. I've tried, and the kids just kind of laugh at me because kids pick up on what your style is, and when you try and break free from it, they're like, what is she doing?
Is she really trying to yell right now?
Yeah, exactly. Miss Ingram, you really want to try and yell at me? Okay. But anyway, so I thought what ended up working for me, and I say working for me, I don't have it down perfectly. It's a huge work in progress still. And I'm really excited about this summer to kind of reevaluate what worked and what didn't, and think of new things for next year. But the biggest thing that worked for me was consistency. So probably by the second 6 weeks was when I realized I have to get my management in check. I had some pretty large class sizes with some pretty rough kiddos, and I don't have the intimidation factor, and so what I had to go with was consistency, which is, we had it was basically a check system. And, the first time they did something that wasn't following our classroom procedures, they got checked by their name. That was a warning. And I just kept on a little clipboard so I could keep track. It wasn't anything public that would embarrass the kids, but I just kept on a clipboard and they knew I was doing it. And the thing was, I had a little bit of pushback because the kids were like, well, I want to know when I get a check. And my response to them was, well, if you aren't following the classroom procedure, which we have posted on the wall over here,
Sure.
like, that's a check, so that's what I ended up doing, was this check system. If they didn't follow procedure, that was a warning. If they got a second check by their name, we just had a really quick conference after class. Hey, what's going on? This is what you're doing. This is what I need from you instead. And then it escalated from there to detention and a phone call home, and then finally a referral. So that's what I ended up doing that worked for me. And my consistency, I wouldn't say is great yet. But that's what ended up getting some of these more rowdy classes, giving me control back. So yeah, I mean, yeah. I guess that's it. Consistency.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good point, because there's a lot in classroom management. And, like you said, there are people who have a personality where they can control a room. We have several teachers here at RMS that can walk into a room and it's controlled. And I mean, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
And deep down, I wish I was that human. But I'm just not. And, me and you are kind of in the same boat to where, I'm bigger than you and I'm taller and I got a beard or whatever, but it's not like I'm not intimidating. People don't look at me and go, oh, he's scary. They're like, oh, he's my homie. Let's give him a high five.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a thing that, I wasn't sure when I first started how much that would, not hurt the class, but how easily I could disrupt my own class, right? Like with 2 sentences or less, probably I can just destroy, 10 minutes of a class just by my presence and how I'm controlling myself. And that takes practice to have that much awareness about, how you're standing, what you're looking like, what kind of comments you're making back at them.
Yeah.
Right? When someone makes when a student makes a smart aleck comment, some teachers, you have that urge to do it back just because that's what you do with your friends or that's what you do with other people. And as a teacher, you have to be able to have that barrier and say, and just be calm. For those that look, you just got to stare, and it's a weird technique, I guess is the proper word for it. An odd skill set that teachers have to kind of develop.
Yeah.
And I don't know, classroom management, for anyone who's listening, like that's the thing. Like everyone talks about it for a reason. It's because every class is different. There are climate changers, those students who come in and they can literally make your room chaotic in 2 seconds. And it's just stuff that happens. And that's why it's such a challenge, because in the reality of public school, unless you're, a very privileged school, is that you're going to have a lot of kids in one room. And not all those kids are going to like each other. Some of them are going to break up with each other. And, if you're teaching middle school or high school, I mean, you're going to have drama and you're going to have issues that, are going to cause issues. And the better you are at staying consistent and the better you are at just, being that presence that it's always the touchstone of the class, the more control you're going to have.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's interesting, I know you saying about it being a technique, because there's so many, we could do a whole podcast of like 6 hours on classroom management, because I could tell you a list of like, I learned where to stand and where not to stand in a classroom this year. Like I was writing something on the board and I had my back turned and I will never do that again. Like there's so many little things I could tell you, but it's so, I don't know. That's one of the things that's kind of fun, though, about it, is because once you get good at it and once you feel natural at it, like, you just figure out what works. And it really is a technique. And I don't want to say an art and make this all, like, frou-frou and fancy and whatever. But it really is interesting once you have the experience in the classroom and you're realizing, oh, like, this is just kind of natural. Like, I know I don't turn my back on my kids ever. And I know that, a really easy way to calm this one down is just go stand by him and just say, hey, are you okay? And it is so interesting how kids are different and they need to be handled differently and de-escalated differently. And
that, that's probably, if I had to name one of the most challenging parts about being an educator, hands down, it's being able to assess each situation differently.
Yeah.
Right? You know, even at like within the same class, I mean, they could be brother and sister. It doesn't really matter. Each student is 100% different than the next student.
Yeah.
And it's, duh, right? It's like, of course they are. They're people and they have real problems and they have real lives that they deal with. But when you're trying to get through a lesson in 45 minutes and you're still working on, trying to understand what a verb is, right? And you're like, this is a verb. And you have to, and that one kid's throwing paper and the other one's mad at the other one. It's having that skill set to literally be able to alter what you're doing almost every second.
Yeah.
And just control it. And that's, I think relationship building comes in handy at this point too, because
Absolutely.
if you're having issues, a lot of the times, at least in my experience, I've had to once I've created that relationship, that control is a little bit easier to have. Mm-hmm. Even with those kids that are chronic walking arounders, right? Everyone knows the wanderers in their class. They just wander around and go touch whatever. Why are you doing that? Even with those, if you have a relationship with them, when you tell them to sit down 7 times, they're just like, okay, right? Yeah. It's not so you're not beating them. It's like, metaphorically speaking, you're not just beating them down with your words.
Do we need to come check on you?
Yeah, sure.
In your room.
Well, it's true though. That relationship, it makes discipline so much better.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember Mr. Whitfield and I talking, and he was asking what my strength was, and I was like, well, I'm definitely not friends with the kids, but I try and build relationships with them because I want them to know I care. And the first thing he said was, you know what, they'll work for you if they like you, and not like in a buddy-buddy way, but if they know that you care about them.
And I'm glad you said that because that's a key difference is the buddy person. Yeah. Because if my first year, I had 1 or 2 students that thought we were best friends and that, partly my bad, partly, just new teacher issues or whatever. But I was like, I had trouble getting that discipline there, but the ones that, I was friendly with or whatever, but there was still that the teacher student mentality. It was a way better. Yeah. And there is a difference that, being buddies isn't the answer. They have enough friends. They have a million friends that they lose and get every day. Uh-huh. The last thing they need is, someone else to sit there and be like, let's be best friends right now. We're getting closer towards the end of your journey, right? Mm-hmm. Metaphorically speaking, we're moving through. We're going towards the end. If you had advice... I know that's a huge question. If you had advice for first-year teachers or teachers in general just struggling maybe with being at a new school, at a new team, in a new environment, maybe even a new content, right? Yeah. What would be the one thing that, like, you got this year that you think would benefit everyone?
Oh, my goodness. The one thing. I'm going to do 2 things because I don't think I can do one thing.
Break the rules. I like rule breakers.
The first thing, I think, would be to ask for help. And I know I touched on this earlier. I really don't have a problem with people thinking I'm a fool, so I've been fine with asking people for help because I know I need it, but I know for some people, especially, that's the thing that's so great about our campus is everyone is so, let me help you. They're very inclusive and welcoming. And, so I haven't felt weird about asking for help, but I would say regardless on what campus you're at, ask people if it's lesson planning that you need help with, if it's classroom management that you need help with. You have resources there. I would be willing to bet more likely than not. So that would be the first thing because, like I said, I've learned more from my coworkers this year than I did collectively in my 4 years at A&M, and that's not because I didn't get a great education at A&M, but it's just so different until you're actually the one in the classroom.
Trial by fire.
Yeah, seriously. And it was, I student taught, and it was still different from student teaching because student teaching, I had a couple weeks where I was the only teacher in the room, but they always knew that, their real teacher would come back. Yeah, right. So that's the first thing I would say. And then the second thing, kind of going back to what we talked about at the beginning, teachers are leaving the profession. Like there is this burnout rate, or at least that people talk about all the time. So I would really recommend to celebrate the little stuff because you're not going to have, like I said earlier, you're not going to have these big, like, I don't know, I changed a kid's life forever and they were going to be a drug dealer and now they're going to be the president, right. Like you're not going to have those stories all the time. You may not get those stories ever, but like, I don't know, like I remember there was one day where this kid had constantly used the wrong your. And I don't teach grammar, but I'm a reading teacher, so we talked about it, and I talked about it with him in his writing and things like that. And then all of a sudden he started using it correctly, and he wrote a little note on a paper and he said, look, there's an apostrophe because it's you are. And like, that was so small, but that was something worth celebrating because it was a tiny little light bulb moment. He got it, And so I don't know, if you don't celebrate the small stuff, then I think it's easy to get weighed down in the hard stuff. But the small stuff happens every single day. It's just easier to kind of brush it aside, you know? So that was a big, whether it's academic success or whether it's behavioral success, like, this kid used to be terrible last week and this week was only terrible 3 days out of the week,
right.
Like that's something I think to be celebrated because that's, it's progress.
Yeah. And to piggyback off the one, that's great advice. But one of the things that, I think really helps is even in like the day, just take a breath. Like say you've had, 2 classes that didn't go that well. Take a breath when you're standing there looking at a class and count all the kids doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's so easy, and it's human nature to latch onto the negative stuff and be like, this is everything going bad and dwelling on it. But if you just take a step back and look at, everyone in your room, I almost guarantee you, you're going to find so many good things to point out. Yeah. Even, small, like, well, this kid's, they're writing the way they need to be. This kid put their heading on their paper. This one's reading the book during free time, and stuff like that. And it's taking the steps back, the moments to pause. Even at home, you're crying, you're at home in your kitchen, you're doing whatever. You're like, okay, what went good today? So that's probably the best advice I think anyone can get, especially in their first year or when they're just feeling too stressed. Yeah. Right. Because like you said, it's. A lot of teachers are leaving, if you believe the statistics and stuff like that. And a lot of teachers are stressed. And I think it's because we're idealistic people, right? I mean, why would you teach if you didn't have a belief in what you could do as a person or like help other people become better people or help people become more educated? Yeah. So we get these ideals in our head, these ideas of, changing the world and all that. And it doesn't happen overnight. Yeah. Right? It's small baby steps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Anyway, I think that's all the time for that we have with Miss Ingram today. I want to thank Miss Ingram for being here. Hopefully it wasn't too traumatizing for you.
Oh, it was fun.
And as always, I do want to end on a wonderful quote. This one is from C.S. Lewis, and it says, the task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts. And I think that's pretty on point with the topic of this podcast. So for everyone listening, have a good one.